There are mystics born of man and there are mystics made of man. So many people ask, what's that difference? What does that really mean? Well, the most prime example is Jesus of Nazareth, who we also know as Jesus Christ. This is a prime example of a mystic born of man. The missing years of Jesus is a very popular subject and topic today. It's very controversial, very argumentative even. Most of the things we know about Jesus was after he started his ministry up until his crucifixion, his resurrection. But to truly understand this mystic born of man, we have to take it back to his originations here upon the earth. One of the most significant and mystical things about his birth is the arrival of the three wise men, or in mystical terms was the Magi, which were studiers of the heavens. They were astrologers, astronomers, mathematicians, engineers, and this star appeared to them. And it wasn't just any old star that just jumped out of nowhere in the heavens. It came before them in their community. And what we know about them is very little. They came from the Far East somewhere. It doesn't say where, but they followed the star. Stars don't move. They're stationary. But this star was not stationary. And it went before them, showing them the way. Popular in Christianity, there was the three wise men in the manger with baby Jesus as he was being born or right after. Well, I'm sorry to debunk Christendom's nativity scene, but the facts are recorded in the book of Matthew. It's either in the 3rd or the 4th chapter where it talks about the three wise men taking this arduous journey and following this star, and it moved before them. Well, what your interpretation of what this star really was, well, that's your opinion. That's up to you. Totally up to you how you internalize that and what conclusions you make of it. But at any rate, it goes on to say they followed this star into Galilee and it disappeared. And they went to King Herod at the time and they said, where's this king that is born in the city of David? You know, we want to go worship him. We want to pay homage. We brought gifts. And Herod said, what are you talking about? And they identified to Herod who they were. And Herod said, oh, wow, this is news to me. I think it's great. Go and find this newborn king and come back and tell me where he is, and I'm going to go worship him myself. And so they left out from the palace of King Herod, and that night this star appeared before them again. And it led them to where the baby Jesus was. It doesn't say he was in a manger, but do your own homework. Read, it's either the 3rd or the 4th chapter of Matthew. It explains it in detail. It said they went into the household and they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh as offerings. So let's just stop right there and go back to King Herod. King Herod summoned his wise men, his mystical people, and he asked them, his astronomers, what's this all about? And they went and they did their sacred geometry, and they looked into the heavens and said, yeah, this star is there. It's a new star. And it's, I believe what the mystical writings say is that it's a blue star. So definitions of what a blue star is varies. Do your own homework on that as well. Okay. So they said, yeah, it's significant, it's powerful, it's an entity that's born that has a very powerful meaning in not only sacred geometry, but in the mystical prophecies as well. Well, Herod didn't like this. And he sent out a decree that all male children from 3 years and younger be put to death. He recognized that this being that had come into this world was somehow a threat to him, or he perceived it as such. At the same time, the three wise men are the ancient magi. A lot of people think they don't exist any longer, but they do. They haven't gone anywhere. It's a functional working order in the mystical world today. It's one of the very super secret orders, and that's about all I can say about that. But at the same time, they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold is gold in any language, anywhere in the world, since the beginning of the time. Everybody understands gold right down to the here and now. Frankincense. It's an ancient, sacred incense, much likened to the copal that the Mayans use down in Central America in their shamanic ceremonies. Very precious. It's purifying. It pretty much takes care of whatever ails you, and to keep you clean, purified. It's a very sacred, mystical, godly, if you will, fragrance that incites all of the glands of the chakras, that incite the sixth sense to bring us into a vibration of the cosmos within our inner self. Myrrh was a very sacred oil. From the origins of what myrrh comes from, I cannot divulge because of the vows that I have taken. I would love to be able to tell you that, but I can't. So they brought valuable gifts in all forms, in the cosmic, in the spiritual, and in the physical, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And they brought these things to this young child, who was probably somewhere around a year old. So going back to Herod, he sent out this decree at this time that these young children, 3 years or younger, male, were to be put to death. This angel came to Joseph and he said, "Get up, arise, and take this mother and this young child and flee to Egypt." Well, Joseph was in the scene, which is a very ancient order, still exists today, that the Jewish religion came out of. Joseph, being of the mystical orders, obeyed that angel. He got his wife and his young child, whose name was Joseph at the time, and they fled to Egypt until the angel of God returned and said, you can go back, to your own people and your own land. So the last mention of Jesus in the canonized Bible is from the book of Matthew, where Jesus was exchanging intellectual thought and philosophy with the learned or wise men of the temple when he was 12 years old. It leaves off at that point, as I said, in the canonized Bible, what was going on in his life, what he was doing, where he was at, until the time that he came before John the Baptist to be baptized. These are the questions that are asked. Where was he? What he was doing is very controversial. But again, the Rosicrucian order maintains for a minimum of 500 years that in their records they have it chronicled where he was and what he was doing for not every minute detail, but for probably 60% of the time. Bear in mind that Joseph and Mary spent some 7 or 8, maybe 9 years in Egypt. They were Essenes. Also remember and bear in mind that the Essenes were baptizing in ancient Egypt at Abydos some 3,800 years ago, quite a few years before Jesus was even born. There's no doubt that Jesus studied, learned in ancient Egypt, and learned things of the ancient mystical orders and hermetic, esoteric, exoteric, thelemic, and gnostic forms of expressions and understandings, which these are the forms that mysticism is written in. Because he came back to his homeland with his parents, and the last chronicled events of the life of Jesus, when Joseph and Mary went back after they missed him on the road back home, and there he was conversing with the wise men in the temple. Well, here's a young boy at 12 years old that's in a very deep intellectual conversation, and no doubt that these men were talking to him because he had something to say to them. There was something of interest. There was an intellectual level of the being, of the spiritual matters of the cosmos, that this child, as it were, was able to impart upon them. Well, no doubt to say there was something that he had learned as a child while in Egypt. So the last mention of him from the time he was 12 years old until he is 30 years old was at this point, when his parents went and gathered him up and took him home. The Rosicrucians maintain that at that point of time in his life, he returned to Egypt, to the ancient mystery schools, where he studied history, antiquities, mathematics, astronomy, astrology, engineering, and even quantum mechanics. And people may dispute that and laugh at that. Well, take a look at the Great Pyramids in Egypt and tell me that quantum mechanics was not employed in their geometrical structures. It definitely was. So he studied these things. There's records of the Buddhists of the ancient Tibetans, that he was in many different places, such as not only Egypt, but Greece. He was in the Himalaya mountains at different monasteries. He was in Afghanistan. He was in Persia. The Native Americans even have an account of him transversing the Atlantic Ocean and coming here in the form of Quetzalcoatl, which is brought out in the ancient Maya writings of the Popol Vuh, as well as Chillimbalam. And they gave a description of him of being tall, flaxen-haired, green or blue eyes, with a beard, and what is pretty much depicted in the portraits of Jesus Christ of what we see today. The Mormons believe in it so much that it's incorporated not only into their religion and the Book of Mormon and the angel Moriah, in believing that he came to the Americas. This may or may not be true. It's a great story any way you look at it. What the truth and reality of all of that is left up to the reader, to the beholder, to what you can discern, what you understand, what you want to understand, what you want to believe or reject, all of those things. But he's chronicled in many of the ancient scrolls and writings of ancient people, not only of Asia, but Europe, but the Americas. And there's 17 to 19 years. You say, well, that's a short time. Well, 19 years is not exactly a short time, especially when you're a young person and you have this zeal and this desire to learn, to reconnect with the cosmos as a mystic born of man. Not made of man, but born of man. He knew he was a mystic born of man. He was the only begotten Son of God. And that's a whole different subject that has a reality and a discourse that goes on for days. But right now we're concerned with the missing years of Jesus, which is a very popular subject and is very controversial as to exactly, what went on, what happened, where he was. But we know when he was 12 years old, he had enough savoir-faire, one might say, that he captured the attention, the imagination, the intellect of the wise men, of the elders, of the temple, in which he allowed his parents to go on about their journey, but he was there going about, as he told them, his Father's works. So he obviously realized at that time what he was, who he was. He was Joseph. He was the same as his father. He became Jesus later on. He was elevated. He acquired. He worked. He reconnected with the cosmos. He knew that he was a mystic that was born of man. But he also knew that he had to reconnect with infinite intelligence. And he knew that he had to work for it. It wasn't because he was privileged, because he was born with a rite of passage, and he was to a great extent. But he knew that he had to work for that. He had to earn it, to come back into the grace of what he was. Now what we're talking about is mystics born of man and mystics made of man. We're all God's children. Red, yellow, black, and white. We're all precious in His sight. Jesus loved the little children of the world. Everyone knows that song. What does that really mean? What does it equate to in the lives of everyday men and women? People ask the question continuously. I hear this all the time. Who am I? Who am I? What am I here for? What am I doing? Well, about half of the question is wrong. It's not who you are, it's what you are. That's the difference. What you are. The best you can hope to be is a mystic born of man. And then a mystic made of man. And that doesn't make you anything less in the eyes of God, whichever one that you are. If you are a mystic that is made of man, your responsibility is way of a realm of consciousness of the being and the self, of what is right and wrong, what is good and evil, what is light and dark, and discipline yourself to do what is right, even though the flesh may be contrary to the spirit. And that's a struggle within itself, is everyone's life is a struggle within itself. But then the mystic born of man is born of blood. That's a whole different story. That's a whole different realm of existence. Jesus of Nazareth wasn't the only being to be a mystic born of man. They came into this life with the remembrance of past lives, of who they were, what they did, what their transgressions were, where they were starting with a negative or a positive karma. A mystic that is made of man does not recall any of these things. It's all kind of new to them. But there's a remembrance within them of something that is vague but yet familiar, but they can't quite put their finger on it. Where a mystic that is born of man, they know. They know. There's something in them that's like a burning ember of a coal. You don't want to pick it up, it's still hot. Where a mystic that is made of man, you have to light the fire. And that's the difference. Fire is the origin, and I speak in the way of the esoteric. But the fire created all things. And the mystic that is born of man will understand this. A mystic that is made of man is the hot coal that is immersed into water that the steam arises from. It returns back to the heavens with the essence of its being contained therein. So, the missing years of Jesus was spent reconnecting himself with infinite intelligence of what he already knew, of what he remembered, not what he learned so much, but what he remembered, a reaffirmation of orders to the subconscious mind. So when he appeared before John the Baptist, who was also in the scene. And he was also his first cousin. John the Baptist was a mystic that was made of man, who recognized a mystic born of man. Do yourself a favor, read the account of the baptism of Jesus, and I think that you will have a better understanding. And the only way that you can reconnect, whether you're a mystic born of man or made of man, is within the mystical orders. Many people today, especially of the New Age order, believe they can ascertain this level of being, of existence, of vibration, of cosmic awareness on their own. And they can to a certain point, but they're going to, as I said earlier, repeat all of the experiments and the things that doesn't work. They're still not going to understand if they're a mystic that are born of man or made of man. Jesus earned the name Jesus. He started out as Joseph, but after going through the ancient mystery schools, he earned the title of Jesus. If you look in the book of Luke, in the chronology of Jesus and the lifeline all the way back to Adam, there was only one other being that had the name of Jesus. This is the name that he acquired because he reconnected to the cosmos. Even though he was a mystic that was born of man and knew he was a mystic that was born of man, he also knew that he needed to have instructions. He needed to have a guidance. He needed to be re-taught what he already knew, what he came into this life knowing, but just had to be reminded. He understood the importance of these mystical teachers from all over the world that could help him realign himself with infinite intelligence. Even though he knew he was the Son of God, he humbled himself. He humbled himself to the point of going back to that ancient mystery school, which still exists today. People like Socrates and Diodorus, Plato, Euripides, Dante, Da Vinci, Newton, Einstein, Jefferson, Madame Curie, Joan of Arc, Clara Barton, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Eleanor Roosevelt, both men and women, used this ancient mystery school to reconnect with infinite intelligence, which helped them to understand, male or female, if they were a mystic born of man or made of man. If they were the hot coal dipped in water, or they were the kindling that simply needed a spark or a match put to it to light it. They were the intellects of the world's leaders, not only political, philosophical, medical, biological, astronomical, men and women that realized there was a greater knowledge to be learned that was not taught in any colleges or universities that exist on the face of this earth. They only existed in an ancient mystery school. The same as Jesus Christ recognized this. And that's where he devoted some 17 to 19 years of his life and his travels to all these different mystery schools that were interconnected back then as they are now. The Rosicrucians admit to being 3,500 years old. That's what they admit to. If you really do your homework and study, you will realize they go back much further than that. But that's what they admit to. And they were existing 3,800 BC. They were doing baptisms long before John the Baptist ever showed up on the scene. And that's simply in the Masonic of principalities, you're raising up or you're rebirth. Because you're dipped in water, you came up out of the water, out of a primordial sea, which all life came from. It's your rebirth. And Jesus presented himself in humility before John the Baptist and was baptized. It was his raising up. And from that point, he started his mystery. If I didn't say that correctly or clarify it, his ministry. But he spent at least 19 years of his life, from 12 years old until he was time of 30, in these ancient mystery schools. Not counting the years as a child spent in Egypt when he came back, that he had learned enough to where he was instructing the wise men of the temple. It's something important, in my opinion, to ponder. Can I do this all on my own, just by myself? Am I that strong? Am I that spiritually intellectual to where I don't need any instruction, I don't need any teacher, I don't need anything because I can do all of this on my own? Well, that's up to you. If you really believe that and you want to go down that path, then be my guest. Or do you want to humble yourself? Do you want to have some guidance, some direction that allows you to learn these things on your own through a simple guidance and direction where you avoid everything that doesn't work to give you the things that does work without an interpretation, without a definition, but allows you to define it, for you to discern it, for you to decide for yourself what it is and what it really means to you. Well, this ancient mystery school still exists today, as it did 3,800 years ago or longer. So you decide, are you an island? Can you do this by yourself? Or would you rather have some companions that walk down that path with you, that share their experiences, their pitfalls, their joys, their sorrows, their angers and disappointments with you, but yet you have a light that shines on that path in which your feet are walking? It's up to you to make that decision. If you want to do it all by yourself, or if you want divine intervention within your life to help and guide and direct you. As above, so below, so let it be.